Hey there, this is The Signal brought to you by Fiverr. My name's Terry Rice, and today we're joined by Gretchen Rubin. Gretchen is one of the most influential voices on happiness, habits, and human nature. She's a best-selling author of books like The Happiness Project and Better Than Before, which have helped millions of people create more joyful and productive lives. As the host of the Happier podcast, she explores practical strategies for building better habits, increasing self-awareness, and unlocking greater well-being. In today's episode, we're diving into her insights on how small changes can lead to a big impact in work and life. Gretchen, it's nice to see you here today.
I'm so happy to be talking to you.
I am too, because as you know, the last time we tried to talk, there was a technical hiccup, and you handled it so well. I still feel kind of guilty about it, but you're just so not apologetic, but just so comforting the way that you communicated. And
it's happened to all of us.
Well, let's talk about that because you're the happiness expert. So do people expect you to be happy all the time when things like this happen, or what?
You know, it's funny. A lot of people assume that I feel under a lot of pressure to be happy all the time or to seem happy all the time, or that people in my life want me to be happy all the time. But I don't really feel that pressure, and nobody around me really expects that from me. So I try to do everything I can within my control to be as happy as I can be. But sometimes stuff happens and you just get annoyed or sad or angry or whatever, and I roll with it.
Maybe you're happier because you're not trying so hard to be happy.
Maybe.
that could be. But your podcast, Happier, on there you share a lot of practical tips and tools for people to become happier in their everyday life. So do you mind just sharing one tool that you recently shared that really stood out to you and your listeners?
Well, this isn't recent. We've talked about this for a long time, but I'll mention it because it's one of the things that people most often mention to me as something that's kind of changed their lives. And it's surprising because it's seemingly very easy and inconsequential, right? So that's the best combination, not much effort and a lot of bang for your buck. And that is something that I call the 1 minute rule. If you can do something in less than a minute, you do it without delay. So if you can hang up your coat, if you can put a piece of paper in the right file, if you can fire off an answer to an email that you already know the answer to. And what happens is this just gets rid of that scum of tasks on the surface of life that can make us feel weighed down, even though they really are inconsequential. And you don't have to set aside an afternoon. You don't have to make a big effort. But sometimes by getting rid of all those little tasks, we feel more capable of tackling the bigger tasks.
I love this approach because you've heard the opposite, where it's you tackle the big task, the rocks if you're trying to fill a jar.
Yes.
And what I found is, there's these big rocks out here, but the pebbles in the sand are distracting me so much, I can't focus on the big rocks.
I think that is such a great point, and I think it's worth emphasizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution that works for everybody. And even for the same person, maybe one time an approach will work better for you than for another. Exactly to your point, every productivity expert out there says, don't start your day with email. Start your day with something big. But I'm like you, the pebbles for me are my emails, and I can't settle down to do really intense writing until I've cleared out my inbox. I just need to know what's in there. And everybody says don't start with those little, kind of dumb tasks. But for me, that's the right way. So I think you're exactly right. Maybe you start with a big thing, but maybe you want to clear the little things out of the way. As long as those don't become a method of procrastination. We've all done that too, where you're like, oh, I need to alphabetize my bookcase before I can sit down and work on my big project. It's no, that's procrastinating.
It's a bit of a reach.
That's a bit of a reach, yes.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned how you start your day, because I was listening to a podcast by Dr. Benjamin Hardy, and I like his work a lot too. And he mentioned one way to start your day is by doing a journal. So before you take in any input, get some output. And I started doing that, but as part of that, I'm also writing letters to and from my future self during that process. And for me, that just lights me up. And I don't want to go too far into the concept, but I know you talk about it a lot too. So I would just love to hear your take on the concept of future self and why it's a good idea for all of us to consider having this two-way form of communication.
Well, I love thinking about the future self, because one thing is, it's a very clarifying question to ask yourself. Because I study happiness, I found that happiness can be a very abstract idea that's sort of hard to get your hands around. And there's like something like 17 academic definitions of happiness, and it gets very confusing. But what you can say to people is like, well, putting aside whatever happiness is, or are you happy? If you did X, Y, or Z for a month or a year, do you think you'd be happier? And people typically are very clear about that. They know something would make them happier. And so when you think about the future self, it's a way to say like, well, if you got to the end of the year and you had successfully worked on your PhD and gotten 5 chapters done, if you had launched your side hustle, if you had set up your internet site, if you had updated your LinkedIn and networked with 50 people or whatever it might be, would you be happier? And I think people have a lot of clarity about that. Sort of like by clarifying what it is we're going after, it often feels much more appealing and sort of like reasonable for us. Because I think sometimes it's easy to sort of hand wave these big aims and be like, oh, sure, I want to do X, Y, or Z. But when you're like, okay, what would your future self think or do? Well, we don't want to let down that future self.
Yeah, and I love that concept because if you do it right, you can actually get mentored by your future self. Just like people say, ask the question like, hey, what advice would you give to yourself like 15 years ago? Like there's a future version of yourself out there who's like begging you not to mess this opportunity up that you have right now.
Okay, so I can't remember the name of the professor who did this, but I remember reading about a professor who said to his students, I'm going to give everybody an A grade in this class, but right now you need to write me a letter explaining what you have done in order to deserve this outstanding recognition. And he said people wrote really thoughtful things like, it was a music class. It was like, I'm going to finally, like settle into a practice of consistent, rehearse, whatever it was. But they sort of had to think about, well, what would it look like if I got an A? What would that require from me? And it really helped them achieve that. And so there is something about that future self that's very compelling.
Yeah, I think more people need to dig in on that because everyone's looking for like these mentors. Like, oh, can I get this person to reply to me or that person? It's like, look, the person who really wants you to do well, to your point, is your future self. And you just got to just follow the steps and you're in a good spot there. But let's go back to one of your other books, Better Than Before. You mentioned the concept of the 4 tendencies, and I see you're already lighting up when you're talking about bringing this up.
Well, I've been thinking about it because of the future self. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you mind unpacking that then? Because again, for me, like I geek out on stuff like this, and I'm just glad to share it with the audience as well.
I would love to. Okay, so I'm going to describe a framework that will divide the world into 4 categories: upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels. And I think most people will be able to know what they are just from this brief description, but you can take a quiz. If you go to gretchenrubin.com/quiz, or you just Google 4 tendencies quiz, you'll find it. It's quick, it's free, like 3.5 million people have taken this quiz. But like I say, most people will know what they are just from this description. And I'll explain why the future self is particularly useful for this. Okay, so what this looks at is a very narrow aspect of our nature, but a very significant aspect of our nature, which is how we respond to expectations. And we all face 2 kinds of expectations: outer expectations, like a work deadline, and inner expectations, like my own desire to start a side hustle. So, depending on whether you meet or resist outer and inner expectations, that makes you an upholder, a questioner, obliger, or a rebel. So upholders are people who readily meet inner and outer expectations. So they meet the work deadline, they keep the New Year's resolution without much fuss. They want to know what other people expect from them, but their expectations for themselves are just as important. Mm-hmm. So they're very focused on execution. They tend to love routine and calendars and to-do lists and deliverables. Their motto is discipline is my freedom. They can be kind of rigid and judgmental because they have their way and they want everybody to, get it done. Then there are questioners. Questioners question all expectations. They'll do something if they think it makes sense. So they're turning everything into an inner expectation. If it meets their inner standard, they'll do something no problem. If it fails their inner standard, they will resist. So they're looking for reasons, justifications. They're often told they ask too many questions. They tend to love customization. They tend to love to monitor. They sometimes will drain and overwhelm people with their constant questioning. They get caught up in their own questions and they have analysis paralysis because they just want more and more information before they move forward, so they can become kind of a bottleneck. So their motto is, I'll comply if you convince me why.
Oh my! I gotta stop. That sounds just like my 6-year-old son Tyson. Like as you were talking.
Okay. Okay. There you go. Let's come back to Tyson. Okay, I'm married to a questioner, so I love that. Love that tendency. Then there are obligers, and obliger is the biggest tendency for both men and women. This is the category that has the most people in it. And obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. So these are people who say things like, why can I keep my promises to other people, but I can't keep my promises to myself? Or why can't I make myself a priority? Or why can't I take time for self-care? These are the people they are the rock of the world. They make great leaders, great followers, great team members, great friends, great family members, great neighbors. They are the people who are most likely to come through, to go the extra mile. But they are frustrated by themselves because they can't keep their promises to themselves. And the TLDR on that is they need forms of outer accountability even to meet an inner expectation. If you want to read a book, join a book group. If you want to exercise more, work out with a trainer, take a class where people expect you to show up, meet your friend who's going to be annoyed if you ghost them. Think about your future self. That for some obligers can be a form of accountability. It's like it's yourself, but it's your future self, and you don't want to let your future self down. So their motto is, you can count on me, and I'm counting on you to count on me. And then the final tendency is the smallest tendency, though it is a conspicuous tendency, is the rebel tendency. So rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do in their own way, in their own time. They can do anything they want to do. They can do anything they choose to do. They can do anything that is their identity. But if you ask or tell them to do something, they are very likely to resist. They don't like to be told what to do. And they don't even like to tell themselves what to do. Like, they don't sign up for a 10 a.m. woodworking class on Saturday because they think, I don't know what I'm going to want to do on Saturday. And just the idea that something's on my calendar is going to annoy me. So their motto is, you can't make me, and neither can I. So those are the 4 tendencies. And if you're thinking, I question the validity of these 4 tendencies, you're probably a questioner.
I love that. And it's interesting. I mean, you've said, I think over 3 million people have taken this quiz.
Yes.
And it feels like a great way to filter people before you hire them, before you partner with them, before you marry them.
Yep.
Because again,
Yep.
like if you just know these things innately, or that's just part of them, it's like, all right, well, then you can at least make sure they're in the right position to succeed, right? If it is an employee. But just knowing these things is super beneficial.
No, 1,000%. And that's really important because often we assume that other people are like us when they aren't. And so this can lead to unnecessary conflict or just people getting in each other's way. For instance, and by the way, for all the questioners who are out there who are saying like, oh, what about the selection bias for all these 3 million people who've taken your online test? Don't worry. I know about selection bias. I paid for a survey to be... so when I say the obliger is the biggest tendency, I know that because I paid for like a true sample. So fear not. But like I'm an upholder, and upholders don't need a lot of outer accountability, but obligers do. And in the past, I've said to obligers things like, well, I don't need to be your babysitter. Do it in your own time. Or, just whenever you want to do it is fine. I don't understand that for obligers, it's actually very helpful to have deadlines and forms of accountability. And just like leaving it like open-ended is not useful for them. Or like, as I said, I'm married to a questioner. Now, whenever I ask my husband a question, I have to say why I'm asking him. Like, what time are we going to leave on Saturday? Because I want to know if I have time to work out. Because if I just ask him a question, he doesn't answer it because he's like, why would I answer your question? I mean, which is kind of a thing that a lot of questioners don't like to answer questions. That's just kind of a funny side note. Right. But so you can, or like if I know that I'm working with a rebel, I will really frame my encounters very differently because I know that it just annoys them if they're asked or told to do something. So I'll always frame it in like, hey, if this works for you and this is the kind of thing that sounds fun and you feel like it, like maybe we could do this, if that's what you feel like doing, rather than being like, hey, why don't we do this? Because often that just like, then I'm just slowing it down because they just have to deal with that spirit of resistance that often arises.
As you're going through this, I mean, I think to myself, so many people these days are using AI to enhance their emails, right? Hey, make sure this is clear and make sure I didn't leave out any details. But in your case, if you could say, do that, and by the way, this person's a questioner or an upholder or so on and so forth.
Terry, I have to say, I never thought about that. That is such a brilliant solution. I'm going to write that down. That is so funny. I could absolutely prepare like a little thing in AI and just say like, put in the touches, or like prompt me to remember like, oh, it's a questioner. Have I explained why I'm making this request or whatever? That is very funny. That's a great idea.
Awesome. Glad I got a win here and it helped you out as well, because you're helping us all out so much.
There you go.
But let's stay with that, because learning a new skill has been linked to increased happiness. So, just in your best opinion, like what emerging areas or skills would you recommend that people explore to boost their well-being, for example, in the near future?
I think anything that they want to learn. Like I always think of this as the atmosphere of growth. People are happier when they're learning, growing, contributing to the world, teaching, fixing. And so, what is something that you want to learn? Now, if you want to learn something sort of in your professional life, you might think, is there a skill that I've been noticing that I need, or is like AI? Like, am I experimenting with AI so that I'm having a sense of how it's moving or how people are using it? Is there, depending on what kind of work you do, there's usually something that you're like, you know what, I could probably spend some time playing around with something and learning about it. There's some way that I could extend myself. Or maybe you feel plenty challenged in your work and you're like, okay, I've got a lot of challenge in my workday. It still can be fun in your leisure time. One of the things I'm doing in 2025 is I'm learning to watercolor, and I decided that I would watercolor every single day in 2025. I'm kind of an all or nothing person, and so it's easier for me to do something every day than some days. And I'm like, I'm just going to do it every single day. And it is so fun. Like when I'm falling asleep, I find myself thinking about doing different kinds of brush strokes. And it's really exciting to be like, I actually have a view of whether I should have a plastic or a, porcelain palette, I've only been doing it for 3 weeks and I'm all excited, So it is very exciting and energizing. And it's especially if it's something where you meet new people, where you go to new places, where you are put into an atmosphere that you want to be in. Like maybe you want to be in nature, or maybe you want more social time, or maybe you want more art, or maybe you want to have more comfort. You could think about, okay, how do I, or maybe you want to have more success at work. How do you put yourself in an atmosphere that is going to help you grow?
I love that approach, and even like the watercoloring. So I recently got into just using colored pencils. I have this coloring book. It's called the anti-anxiety coloring book for adults. And then my kids start coloring in it, and they give me anxiety because they're messing up. They're going all outside the lines and stuff. But either way, it's a fun way for us to sit down.
The world of colored pencils is so fun. Yes.
It is. It gets expensive. There's some very high-end ones.
It does. Yes.
Learning about.
Yes. Well, I will say one thing about taking up a new endeavor is you don't want your purchasing to get ahead of your use. And this is something that is very common. Like somebody decides, I'm going to start a podcast, and they get a this and a that and a this and a that, and then they only do 2 episodes, Or you want to get into watercolor and you buy the this and the that and the this and the that. It's very fun to buy things. Most people enjoy kind of that, especially if it feels productive. Like you're not being like, oh, this is just like me being indulgent, but this is me actually doing something like useful for myself or for my livelihood. But you want to make sure that you don't like buy a bunch of stuff and outstrip your willingness to make use of them. One thing that can be helpful is, can you buy a cheaper version, or like get a hold of a cheaper version or a secondhand version and try it out? And then if you find that you're really using it, you might upgrade. Like if somebody wanted to learn to cook, they might deal with just having kind of a cheap set of knives. And then if they really are cooking, then you're like, okay, well, it's worth an investment. Really nice kitchen knives are very expensive, but if I'm cooking all the time, that's a really good use of my money because it's very healthful, it's economical, it's creative, there's all kinds of reasons. But don't go out and buy the most expensive knives you can find before you've proved to yourself that you're actually going to cook. Because sometimes, like, we have these dreams for ourselves and, we don't follow through. You don't want to spend a lot of money that in the end just ends up gathering dust.
I've learned that lesson the hard way. I was into cycling for about 2 weeks. And that was a very expensive 2 weeks. So
lots of stuff you can buy for cycling. Lots of fun stuff to buy at the store. Yeah.
Found that out the hard way. And that's when I started CrossFit. I was like, look, I'm not buying anything new until at least go to like 30 workouts. And I think that's what helped.
That's a great rule. That's a great rule, which is sort of like, because, and also, one of the things, and I write about this in my book, Better Than Before, which is all about habit change, is that sometimes people think that we should reward ourselves for keeping our good habits, but actually rewards mess with our heads. You should do a habit because of the habit itself. The reward for a good habit is the habit itself. The reward for yoga is yoga. The reward for CrossFit is CrossFit. But it is true that if you're the one kind of reward that can work is something that takes you deeper into a good habit. So if you're like, I've been going to CrossFit so much, I need better workout clothes. Well, that makes sense because what are you going to do with your workout clothes but CrossFit? Or like, I'm going to buy a new yoga mat because I'm doing so much yoga. That's not the same thing as like, oh, now I get to buy a leather jacket because I've been doing so much CrossFit. Or even worse, oh, I've been so good about eating healthy, now I can have a giant slice of chocolate cake. It's like you want to do something that is going to enforce the habit, but you also don't want to get ahead of yourself and buy all that stuff in advance.
I'm feeling triggered, but also empowered, just because like when I just first started, not to go too deep on this, when I first started CrossFit, I would have a cheat meal every weekend, which was like one slice of cake that I had to order from a restaurant. But I felt weird putting like $6 on my debit card, so I'd get like 2 slices. I'm like, great, now you're double cheating. So you're right. If I had done something more aligned, like drink a Gatorade or something, that probably would have worked out better. Right. And as I'm listening, I mean, a lot of the things that you're talking about, like it's not going to guarantee happiness. Like some of these things, it's part of being an adult, how you handle it, and it will help you be happier in the long run. But what I'm wondering is, as we're parting here, is just thinking about your book, Secrets of Adulthood. What principles do you find most relevant today, given these changing times? Everything's somewhat up in the air. It seems like every day. So what principles do you think we can leverage today just to be happier in any given moment?
Well, when it comes to happiness, the important truths are too important to be new. So these are all things that are very well known. But I would say if you can answer that question 2 ways, or actually 3 ways. So one way you could say is, if you want to be happy, think about your relationships. Ancient philosophers and contemporary scientists agree that strong relationships are a key and maybe the key to happiness. We need to have strong, enduring bonds. We need to be able to confide. We need to be able to get support, and just as important for happiness, we need to be able to give support. So anything you do with your precious time, energy, or money that helps you deepen relationships or broaden relationships is going to make you happier. Another way you could answer that is think about your physical body. We've been talking about the physical body a little bit. Wherever you go, your physical state is going to color your emotional state. And it's easy to forget that, like, oh, maybe I feel stressed out and overwhelmed because I'm only getting 5 hours of sleep at night. Or maybe I'm feeling like sluggish because I never get any exercise and I'm just like indoors all day. So you want to think about things like getting enough sleep, getting movement into your day. You don't need to train for the marathon, but like at least a 20-minute walk will do amazing things for your body. Making sure that you eat and drink right so that, you're not, sometimes people skip a meal, and then they're so ravenous that they eat, all the junk food in sight. So you want to think about just your physical body and also your physical comfort. I wrote a book, Life in 5 Senses, that's all about our sensory surroundings. And sometimes we don't do enough to is there an annoying noise that I could figure out a way to shut off? Or am I too hot or too cold? Or is my chair, am I still sitting on a dining room chair, 4 years into work from home instead of getting a proper chair? And so I'm just uncomfortable, thinking about just the physical body. And then the other thing is just thinking about yourself. We started this at the beginning talking about everybody's different, and what works for one person won't work for another. Something that will work for an upholder is not going to work for a rebel. if you're a morning person, you want to get up early and do your work early. If you're a night person, you're probably most productive and creative and energetic later in the day. So you want to take yourself into account. A lot of times when people are thinking about how to build a happier life, they try to jam themselves into somebody else's model instead of really thinking about like, well, what's true for me? What are my interests, my values, my temperament, when have I succeeded in the past? These are, questions that we all have to figure out for ourselves. So I think, one of them is there is no one size fits all solution. There's no 5-point bullet point PDF you can download from the internet that'll give you the secret, because we're all individuals.
Gretchen, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. I'm relatively stoic, but I've been smiling the whole time I'm talking to you because I'm enjoying the conversation so much. So thank you for that. Everybody, as a reminder, go to GretchenRubin.com/quiz so you can understand what your tendencies are.
Thank you so much. I so enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you as well.